The Forgotten Garden Gnome. The old factory was due to be demolished. The production halls and warehouses had stood empty for years. No one took any interest in the site anymore. The buildings were falling into ruin, and not even the homeless ventured into the remote factory with its 2 tall brick chimneys. Here and there, ravens had built nests. Otherwise, no one visited the former factory anymore. No police drove past here. No night watchman checked that everything was in order anymore. Why should they? You wouldn't meet a soul. Empty, lonely, abandoned, decaying. One of the many industrial wastelands that nobody wanted anymore. A remnant of a bygone era that would never return. But why am I telling you this story? Because this factory was once something very special. For it didn't actually start out as a factory, but as a workshop. Here, many skilled craftsmen and journeymen produced small figurines entirely by hand, which were particularly popular throughout Germany. It was almost impossible to imagine a single front garden in Germany without one of these figurines in it. I'm sure you've long since guessed that these figurines were garden gnomes. Exactly. This old factory had once been the pride of Germany, at least as far as the production of beautiful garden gnomes was concerned. Over time, automation and the acquisition of a large fleet of machinery transformed the workshop into a factory. The garden gnomes were no longer hand-cast and individually painted after drying. Instead, thanks to automation, they all looked exactly the same. There were 100 identical fishing Klaus figures, all looking exactly alike. Even pipe-smoking Hans was nothing special anymore. He stood by the hundreds on the shelves, each one looking just like the next. No master craftsman signed his work with his initials anymore, work that he had individually shaped and painted. At first, the figures were still made from terracotta or fired from clay. In the factory, they were then cast in plaster molds and later even simply made from plastic. That didn't go well for long, as every strong gust of wind caused utter chaos in the front gardens with plastic garden gnomes. Indeed, some of these little plastic fellows even flew over the fence to the neighbor's garden or even onto the pavement. People no longer wanted such little creatures, and sales of the little fellows continued to decline, until the factory was forced to close its doors for good due to unprofitability. The site fell into oblivion. Those who had once worked here moved away to the vicinity of another factory where hard-working staff were needed, and many a flat stood empty in the neighborhood. But one day, a removal van pulled up outside one of the empty houses and a young family moved in. A man with his wife and little Leon, his sister Alina and baby Luca. Leon was almost 10, Alina was 8, and I'm not quite sure how old the baby was. I think about 4 or 5 months. The parents had moved right at the start of the long school holidays from the big city to a more rural area, not far from the old factory, onto a street that had a baker's and a butcher's right at the front of the crossroads. You don't see that very often these days. The parents were busy unpacking and settling into the house. Leon, Alina and Luca's father, had inherited it some time ago from his own father, who had worked in the garden gnome workshop himself in his younger days, before it became a factory. Leon and Alina had plenty of time to potter about. They wanted to explore the new neighborhood, see if there were any other children around, and find out what sort of things they could get up to here to keep boredom at bay. So it was hardly surprising that, during one of their wanderings, they eventually ended up on the old abandoned factory site and wanted to examine everything in detail. After all, their grandfather had often spoken of his garden gnomes. Right at the entrance, where the factory gates must once have stood, garden gnomes cast in cement stood to the right and left in front of imposing brick gate pillars. Unfortunately, the ravages of time had taken their toll on them, and a few careless lorries had probably scraped against them as well. The pigeons and the rain had done their bit. They were no longer a pretty sight. The children continued their adventure in search of their grandfather's footsteps. "There's nothing left to see here," grumbled Alina. But Leon was full of a spirit of discovery. "Come on, Let's have a look at the warehouse back there. All the machines here have been dismantled or are rusted away. There's nothing left. Across the large concrete yard to the warehouses, which had once actually been connected to the railway, for the rusted tracks were still clearly visible, even though the track bed had long since been overgrown with all manner of weeds. The warehouses were so vast that the children's voices even created their own echo. The roof was already damaged in many places, and it seemed rain had seeped in here and there on more than one occasion. But today it was dry. Look, there's something flashing back there. Alina had a keen eye. It really is. Now Leon had spotted it too. A ray of sunlight had strayed in, and as the children drew nearer, they saw the sun reflected in a shard of glass. The shard was interesting because it was colorful. The children had bent down low. Alina had even crouched down. The old shelves had been cleared out, but it was impressive just how many thousands of garden gnomes must have been stored here. Now, however, Leon and Alina were at eye level with the very bottom shelf, looking at the colorful shard of glass and how the light refracted within it. It looked beautiful. When Alina lifted her head slightly, however, she saw something else. Leon, what's that back there? She pointed to the farthest corner of the bottom shelf. Yes, who do we have there? Leon had stretched out his arm and emerged holding a completely dusty garden gnome figurine, which was, however, entirely white. Not a single stroke of paint had been spared it. Well, if that isn't a treasure, a garden gnome from the old garden gnome factory. Why on earth wasn't it finished being painted? Come on, said Alina. Let's take it home and give it a proper clean first. Dad's bound to have some paint in the cellar, then we'll have a real garden gnome from Grandad's factory. There was a very special story behind the old garden gnome, but the children wouldn't find that out until later. You have to know that, way back in the day, garden gnomes, or sometimes called gnomes, were designed to look like little gardeners with a rake or a spade, garden tools in other words. Or they were modeled on miners. There were some with a pickaxe as a tool or a leather apron, and of course with the little lanterns that miners used to carry back then to see in the depths of the mountain. There were also some with a wheelbarrow, but all the garden gnomes had one thing in common, a red pointed cap. Anyone who took an interest in gnomes and garden gnomes was usually a superstitious person who tried to protect themselves from evil influences with all manner of symbols and rituals. The garden gnome that the children had found there, all dusty in the corner of the warehouse, was such a symbol. The workers had chosen an unpainted colleague to bring them luck at work in the factory and protect them from accidents. That's why they'd all donated a penny or some other small item, which was poured into the white garden gnome. Then he vanished onto his shelf and was left to his own devices and his important task of bringing the workers luck and looking after them. The father came home and the children were all excited. Dad, we were in Grandad's old factory and imagine, we found another garden gnome in one piece. Children, that's quite impossible. The factory's been empty for more than 20 years. There's nothing left there worth taking away. Well, just have a look first, said Leon, showing the spotlessly scrubbed garden gnome he'd been holding behind his back. I can't believe it. Let me see. Henry stretched out his arm and took the little fellow. Indeed. And look, there's even a tiny little stamp here with 2 letters. It says WH. Those aren't your granddad's initials, mind you, but it means this little fellow must come from the good old workshop before manufacturing was automated. Leon fetched a magnifying glass to get a better look at the stamp. Yes, there was WH inside a circle and a small number. 92? He asked in amazement. Perhaps it was the 92nd model by this master craftsman, said their father. Did you know that there are exactly 4,443 different garden gnomes, not one more and not one less? There is one example of every garden gnome model in the Garden Gnome Museum in Austria. Did your dad, Our granddad tell you that? Alina wanted to know. Exactly. I know that from him. Dad, can we perhaps paint this little forgotten garden gnome? Leon was absolutely thrilled. Let's see. I think it's cast plaster or clay. I've no idea. Best we take him with us straight away and show him to a paint shop. They'll know what to do. So, Henry packed his 2 children into the car, let his wife know, who was busy with baby Luca, and off they went to the paint shop as it was about to close. And because the father knew his children, he knew they'd find it hard to wait until the next day. "Hello," said the shop assistant. "How can I help you?" Shop assistants always say that, and you could tell the man was longing for the end of his shift and didn't really fancy serving anyone else now, just before 6:30, instead of putting the last few things away for the next day. "We've brought you an old garden gnome that for some reason is white and unpainted. But we don't know what material it's made of, which is why we're here. What paints do you need for this material?" With that, Henry pulled the little fellow out of a small blanket. He'd wrapped him up so that after all those years in his lonely hiding place, nothing would happen to him at the very end. Indeed, the shopkeeper soon looked genuinely interested. "That's odd. It's not made of plastic or plaster, it's white porcelain. Look here, if you tap it, it sounds completely different to cast plaster." And with that he took a pencil and tapped the little gnome. It sounded bright and cheerful. "The sound is so bright because porcelain is fired at high temperatures. This here, however," and he had turned the figurine over, "seems more like a sort of plaster plug sealing the garden gnome from below." Father and the children looked on with genuine interest, for they hadn't noticed that at home at all. There are very specific colors for porcelain, though they don't look quite as you'd imagine when they're applied. The garden gnome, that is, any porcelain figurine, would need to be fired again after painting. Only then do the desired colors and effects become visible, the sales assistant continued, and he added, "But before firing, the plug should be removed so there are no nasty surprises and the little fellow doesn't burst in the kiln." "I'll make a note of that," said Henry. They bought red for the pointed cap, blue for the jacket, grey for the trousers, and brown for the shoes and apron. Then they headed back to the comfort of their own home. "It's late now, but when I get home from work tomorrow, we'll get straight on with the garden gnome, and soon he'll be shining in new splendor and color." Leon and Alina went to bed without a fuss. They could hardly wait for the painting to begin the next day. It was still the holidays, and the day dragged on until their father finally came home from work. Their mother was, as usual, busy with the baby, and certainly had no intention of getting paint all over her hands. "Hello, children," said Henry. "Well, shall we get started?" And start they certainly did. Leon and Alina had been waiting all day long just for this exciting moment. And, even though they didn't know it yet, things were about to get even more exciting. The Forgotten Garden Gnome from the disused Garden Gnome factory held a secret. And now Dad, Leon, and Alina were on the trail of it. Right. What had the sales assistant at the paint shop said? We should remove the plug first. Then we'll give the little chap a bit of a clean inside too, if necessary, and then we'll paint him in good old garden gnome style. I found a few pictures of garden gnomes on the internet. Maybe we can paint him like that or something similar. With that, Leon placed 3 printouts on the table. Yes, great, Leon, so we've got a few templates to start with. Now they placed the Forgotten Garden Gnome on a towel so that nothing would break off the porcelain figure, and set about examining the base of the figure. "Well," said the father, "how on earth are we going to get this plug out?" Indeed, the plaster plug seemed to have been fitted there for the next eternity. Alina had an idea. "Maybe we could just put the little man in water and the plaster will dissolve." "That was the most brilliant idea we could have come up with," laughed Henry proudly. They took a plastic bowl, filled it with water, carefully placed the figurine inside, and then they had to wait. They were put to the test. Patience wasn't exactly the children's strong point. 2 hours later, after dinner had finished, Dad, Leon, and Alina checked again. Dad poked the plug with a wooden toothpick. "Well, you can see the plaster's getting soft. We can only guess how long it's been stuck in the figure, but we won't get anywhere with it today. I think we'll leave the little fellow in the bath overnight. Alina and I can have a look in the morning and hopefully pry the softened plaster out. Then we'll put him in the sun to dry, and in the evening, when you get home from work, we can paint him." Leon had just mapped out the plan for the next day, assigning them a task so they wouldn't have to kill time again, just waiting for their father. "Good idea," Alina agreed. Henry was fine with it. After all, his children had found the garden gnome. What could possibly go wrong? He had no idea what was yet to come, but even he wouldn't have been able to stop things now. The next morning, straight after a somewhat hurried breakfast, we find Leon and Alina together with the garden gnome, who was lying on his soft base once more. They had laid out all sorts of small tools: a teaspoon, a screwdriver, a scraper, even a stiff wire. And now, they set to work gently. The plaster is really full of water and crumbling. Leon's very first attempts at chipping away had already brought this to light. Alina was now holding the gnome steady so that it wouldn't slip and fall onto the floor. Meanwhile, Leon was busily at work with the small tools, prying little chunks of plaster out of the figure's base, bit by bit. There's no more plaster in there, but there's still something. Alina now peered into the hole at the bottom of the garden gnome from the other side. It looks like a piece of fabric. Alina was right. The corner of a scrap of fabric was visible. She pulled at it carefully, and little by little, a small cloth emerged, tightly rolled up. It was clear that the children naturally wanted to unwrap this find from inside the figure's hollow body. The little cloth was already unrolled. "A treasure!" Alina's words rang out loud in the room. Even their mother came running over. "What sort of treasure?" their mother wanted to know. "Well, look, Mum." Leon pointed to the coins, a gold ring, small gold nuggets, and a few tiny sparkling stones that were now lying on the unrolled cloth. The children were absolutely thrilled with their find. After all, it's not every day you just stumble upon a treasure like this. A big surprise was still in store for them, however, which only came to light when their father came home from the office that evening and stood there, equally amazed, poring over the objects they'd found. "Well, this is dental gold," Henry explained expertly as he picked up each piece one by one and examined it under a magnifying glass. "These seem to be semi-precious stones or even gemstones, but I don't know much about them. A jeweler would need to have a look at them. And these coins, this one here even looks to me like a gold coin. It says Taylor on it. An expert needs to look at that too." Then Henry examined the gold ring under the magnifying glass. "There's something engraved on it. You can still read it clearly." "Can you read it out?" Leon was curious. "From MW to KW." And then he read 1936. "Wait a moment," said Henry. "My father got married in 1936. As you know, his name was Karl Wenzel, and his wife was Maria." Henry was holding his own father's wedding ring in his hands. How could that be? He had no explanation for it, but an old garden gnome told me the secret. By the time the workers had molded and fired the porcelain garden gnome, Grandfather had already been a widower for 2 years. Good old Maria had died of a nasty fever just 2 years after the wedding. The superstitious master craftsmen each placed something valuable inside the figurine so that it might bring them luck in the years of work to come. So the grandfather placed the old wedding ring inside. They then sealed the garden gnome and put it in its place in the warehouse. There it was forgotten for decades, until Leon and Alina were rummaging around there and happened to look on the very bottom shelf of the old storeroom. And so it came to pass that the children's grandfather, even after his own death, had brought about something wonderful for his little grandchildren, together with his former colleagues. The garden gnome was beautifully painted by the children and their father, then fired by a local potter. Now it stood in the front garden, bringing the family good luck. Before they placed it in its spot in the garden, each member of the family put one of their favorite items inside. Even the old handkerchief was reused. The figure was then fitted with a new plaster stopper, and so a new, happy chapter began for the family. The old contents of the garden gnome, the coins, gemstones, and gold teeth, amounted to a tidy sum of money, which Henry invested wisely for the children. Thus, a solid foundation was laid for the children's future. As you can see, even in the dustiest of surroundings, you can sometimes find something sparkling. So keep your eyes peeled when rummaging around. And with that, we have reached the end of our fairy tale for today.